and welcome to our webinar. We are joined by Sydne Plunkett, who is a MSW or has her master's in social work and is a school social worker, and Kelly Waterman, who is a registered nurse. We are so incredibly grateful to be with them tonight. I am Maddie. I am a bachelor's level student in the social work program at my university, and I'm also an intern here at ALD Connect. We are so excited to have them both here with us. Before I turn the time over to our speakers, I would like to introduce Sydney and Kelly. Sydney is both an ALD mom and a woman living with ALD herself. Professionally, she works as a school social worker and a mental health therapist, playing a key role in the eligibility process, developing appropriate supports, and collecting data to ensure IEPs and 504 plans are effectively implemented in the public school system. In her work as a therapist, she supports children, teens, and adults as they navigate a wide range of life challenges, including living with a rare disease. As a mom, educator, and member of the rare disease community, Sydney is a strong advocate for mental health and for building the supports within the education system that leads to lifelong success for students and families. Kelly Waterman is a dedicated registered nurse with 26 years of experience who dedicates herself to providing compassionate, comprehensive care while advocating for both physical and psychological needs of her patients. As a mother of two boys with ALD, first identified through newborn screening, she brings both professional expertise and personal resilience to navigating complex medical, emotional, and educational challenges. She uses her experience to advocate for her sons, support positive patient outcomes, and serve as a strong, knowledgeable resource within the ALD community and has extensive knowledge navigating 504s and IEPs. Before we start, some quick housekeeping. Please mute and put your questions in the chat as they come up. Please keep the questions relevant to the topic at hand. We also have a disclaimer. This webinar is for informational purposes only. The discussion is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you or a family member are ill or suspect that you or a family member are ill, seek professional medical attention immediately. ALD Connect and our partner speakers do not recommend or endorse any specific physicians, treatments, procedures, or products, even though they may be mentioned during this webinar. Always consult your healthcare provider with any questions regarding adrenoleukodystrophy. I will now turn it over to Sydne Plunkett. Sorry, Sydney.
That's okay. One moment, I'm gonna pull up. Perfect. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. Does that work? Okay, perfect. Hi everybody. My name is Sydne Plunkett. I'm so very excited about this webinar. I think that this is something that is a hot topic in the world of education in general, but especially when you're looking at something like a rare disease. So I was really excited to partner with Kelly and kind of talk through our experiences both personally and professionally. So our goal for today is kind of talk through both IEPs and 504s and how they relate to ALD. A little bit of introduction. So, again, my name is Sydney. Personally, I am a woman affected by ALD. I learned of my carrier status in my early 20s. I'm a mom of two. My older son, Peyton, is 11. He has ALD and is currently asymptomatic. But he's kind of been my force through all of this, kind of navigating the school world. He has a 504, and we actually started his 504 in preschool. So it's never too early to start the process. He did 2, 3, and 4-year-old preschool. And I think it was 3-year-old preschool that we got him on his 504 plan. And then I also have a 1-year-old daughter. She turned 1 earlier this month, and she was conceived through IVF to ensure that we did not pass the gene to her. Professionally, I'm a school social worker. I work in the high school setting in the state of Illinois. So I support students in the 9th through 12th grade, but I've dabbled in middle school a little bit. And then obviously through Peyton, have kind of lived the elementary school life, and then that mental health therapist, which has just brought a lot of really good experience, helping families and kids and parents kind of navigate all different life obstacles related to education and not. The purpose of today is to kind of talk through what an IEP is, what a 504 is, what the eligibility process looks like. My goal for this is for you all as caretakers to be able to walk away feeling empowered and educated and showing up to your student's school. And I think that in and of itself can be kind of intimidating. So hopefully to kind of educate you through the process so that you feel comfortable advocating and you know what your options are as a caretaker, and kind of what your role is when we're talking about their team, their IEP team or their 504 team. That doesn't just mean school staff, that includes you as their caretaker. And so just kind of understanding what your role in all of that is. Couple things to know before we get started. Um, all process and procedures can vary between states, even between school districts in the same state. Things can be different across the board. So just being mindful that the first thing that you want to do is identify the person in your student's building who's in charge of overseeing IEPs and 504s. Typically, it's an administrator. Oftentimes, they're called like an associate principal of student services. If you have an older student in middle school or high school, it might look like a student service division chair. Most of the information is posted on your school website, but don't ever be afraid to call the school or email and just say, hey, I need to be put in contact with the person that oversees IEPs or 504s, and then they can point you in the right direction. The other thing that's important to know is all the information that we're talking about today is tied to the public education setting. So private institutions are not required to offer 504s or IEPs. A lot of them do. They're usually not called 504s or IEPs. They might have their own version, but just kind of for general terms, all this information is tied to the public school setting. And then just kind of some background. So both IEPs and 504s, they're legally binding documents, which means they have process, procedure, requirements of you as a caretaker as well as the school. And, it's okay to ask like the questions that are relevant to, who's the person that's in charge of this, or how often will this be reviewed? Something that I appreciate about them being a legal document is it kind of takes it off of you as the parent and your student while we're working on advocating, and advocacy is so important. It's not something that is up to like teacher discretion. It's a legal document that they're required to follow. And then just kind of differentiating between the two. So when we're talking about IEPs, we're looking at specialized instruction and services to best support your student. And when we're looking at 504s, we're looking at equal access to their education through accommodations that are not necessarily like changing the expectation of the learning environment. Something else to note too, IEPs and 504s are obviously tied to the education setting. After that, whether it's a transition program or the workforce, they're not required to follow them, but many places do. They have their own kind of process and procedure. Because I work in high school, I work really closely with students who have IEPs and 504s and are transitioning into the college setting. So making sure that they have all their documentations, identifying what school they're going to go to, where at the school they can bring their IEP and say, hey, these are the supports that I had when I was in high school. How can these be applied to the college setting? And same thing as a workforce. I've had a lot of students get a job after high school and they say, like, hey, here are the supports that I benefited from in high school. How can these kind of be applied in this role? So just something to be mindful of long term. So first we'll talk through IEPs. It looks like a lot of information and it is, but the more you know, the more you're able to kind of ask those questions. So IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. They're legally binding documents that mandate free specialized instruction and related services for eligible students with a disability. The purpose of an IEP is to support school staff and caretakers to work together to improve the individual educational results and experiences of your student. So obviously kind of going through the motions of a typical school experience, but taking into consideration your student's specific needs and accommodations that they need to be successful on their own. Every IEP looks different, but typically we're looking at things like academic placement, goals, related services, how many minutes that students are being serviced on those services, different accommodations that students can be offered within the classroom setting or sometimes without the classroom setting. And what's most important to note here is we're looking for that least instructive environment. So we want all students to be placed with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. So I feel like IEP teams really focus on how do we support students in that like regular ed setting as best we can while also meeting the needs that they require to be successful. When we're looking at eligibility, I think that this has been one of the most common questions that I see like on our ALD platforms and things all school related. So in order to request an IEP, it must be put in writing. So typically that looks like an email. And the school has 60 days to complete an evaluation in the domains of academic, health, vision, hearing, social, emotional, cognitive, and motor. So usually a school psych oversees that process. They'll look at things like discipline data, attendance, grades. Sometimes they look at state assessments. So there's a lot of information that goes into that. And it's important to know that you, as their caretaker, play a huge role in that, whether that's providing documentation or sharing any kind of like social, emotional, or academic concerns that you have. You'll hold what's called a domain meeting. So it's kind of a round robin of people that interact with your student and who is in charge of holding those evaluations to determine what kind of deficit your students might be experiencing and how they can support them best in the school setting. To be eligible for an IEP, a student must have a disability that falls under one of 13 categories. So there's different criteria that we kind of look through to see what type of eligibility we're looking at to kind of like get the whole picture of what your student needs. It's important to know that the medical diagnosis documentation isn't necessarily relevant, but for the ALD world, I think it's really helpful to kind of paint that whole picture. School-based evaluations will take place. So a lot of times parents will have evaluations from outside of school that they will bring in. If it's within the last year, then we typically can use it. But it's not like the tell all be all because when you're doing an outside evaluation, the setting is different than in school. So my point of that is the more information that schools know, the more that they can cater that information to your specific student. But it's not necessarily something that you have to have. And then when we're looking at that eligibility, when we look at ALD, most commonly it falls under what we call OHI, so other health impairment, and students who are a little bit more progressed in the disease or have experienced cerebral involvement. They're often more that like specific learning disability. And so again, just making sure that their eligibility is the most accurate for their current functioning and needs and all of those good things. Some general IEP information. So after you go through the eligibility process and you have what's called that evaluation meeting, if your student qualifies, then IEPs are good for 3 years. Every 3 years, then they will hold what's called a reevaluation meeting. So you'll have another one of those domain meetings. They'll talk through strengths, areas of growth. A classroom teacher will also attend to kind of give that classroom perspective. Any related services, if your student is getting social work, PT, OT, speech, the whole IEP team comes together to kind of talk through what they're working on and what your child needs going forward. At the absolute bare minimum, an IEP is reviewed at least once a year, but any member of the team, including yourself as a caretaker, can request an IEP meeting at any time. So even if you want to meet once a week, it's important to know that you have a say in that and you don't have to wait for someone from school to reach out and say like, hey, we've seen some concern here. We want to make some adjustments. You are a very important member of that team. And so just knowing that you have that capability of requesting that at any time. And then also good to know, so any goals that are written in your student's IEP, we call them SMART goals and they are tracked. You'll know the specific criteria that is being measured and how often. Typically, you'll get like quarterly or semester goal updates to kind of let you know how your student is doing. Ideally, you're not learning this only at those like benchmark timeframes. Hopefully, you're getting that communication throughout the year, but at least you know that you're going to get it that like once a year annual review of your student's plan. So a little bit more specific to ALD. Typically, when we see students who have that advanced form, that cerebral ALD, that's typically when we're looking at that IEP plan. People with ALD that are asymptomatic, we typically see them more on that 504 plan to support that adrenal insufficiency and to kind of educate school staff on what ALD is and what to look for. So even for Peyton, we look at those like fine motor, large motor. We have kind of a plan that he works with OT at least once a year. And so instead of comparing him to his peers, he's compared to him to himself every year so that we can catch if he's used to buttoning up a whole jacket and he can do that for a long period of time and now all of a sudden that's not something that he's presenting appropriately, then that might kind of spark us to reach out to our team and say like, hey, we're noticing this change in behavior. What are our options? What do you think to do? All those good things. The IEP goals, they're based on your student's current functioning. So there's no like blanket statement, blanket goals of every student in the third grade with ALD gets this specific goal. There's different criteria that the IEP team is looking through. And ideally, if it's something that they want them to work towards, they might say something like 3 out of 5 observable opportunities. So we want that goal to be measurable, realistic, but also kind of challenging the student to work towards making that appropriate progress. IEPs offer a variety of related services that a lot of times students get outside of school, but you can also get them in school as well. Most commonly, that's occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work, and assistive tech or working with a speech pathologist. IEPs support change over time. So anytime you learn, if you go to an appointment or something changes in your student's health, an IEP can be adjusted and formatted to your student's specific needs. So it's not like we're going to meet in September and make this plan and then, we can't meet until next September. They're fluid documents that can be changed. It just requires a like team meeting and conversation and signatures. but it's kind of nice to track that progress over time. And then including that health safety plan for the adrenal insufficiency part. And if your student has emergency meds, if they're located at school, if they take daily meds, at what point in their day are they required to take it? What does that routine look like? Who's in charge of that? Who will get them to the nurse's office? All of those good things. And then again, that reminder of those meetings every year. So at least once a year, regular progress monitoring data with you as a caretaker receiving all that information related to their progress. And then just knowing that if a student has an IEP or 504, their school staff receives that information before the start of the school year. So typically they have a couple days in advance to kind of review that. They have that information in like a sub binder if the teacher's out. Everyone that works with your student gets a copy of it. So if there's a recess monitor, the music teacher, obviously the nurse, anyone that will be directly working with your student will have access to that information, which kind of helps them pre-learn their needs. So they're not like learning your student and learning their needs kind of all at the same time. These are just a couple different examples that are common for ALD specific accommodations. So we look at things like emergency care, so that adrenal insufficiency piece, if they keep medication at school, any kind of access to nursing if it's on a typical basis, what that routine looks like, having that action plan for medication that's even outside of ALD or adrenal insufficiency. And my favorite part is putting that required contact home. So making sure that your student is never in the nurse's office without you being notified, because you as their caretaker need to make sure that you have all of the information that's needed for you to reach out to your medical care team if you feel like that's important. Supporting behavior and social needs. So checking in with the social worker or the counselor, having a buddy system, creating routine and predictability kind of in their day, making things a little bit easier, transitions, all that good stuff. In the classroom, things like extended time for tests, reduced workload, being able to do like oral testing or using their text to speech instead of having to do a written test, providing visuals, whether that's for like an assignment or just their routine. Um, there's a lot of different options, which is really nice. But kind of looking through like what supports your student the best. That classroom environment. So if they need to be seated in a specific area of the classroom, reducing any kind of walking distances, especially if any of their classes are like upstairs and they need to access an elevator, what that process looks like, who's responsible for taking them, and how we make sure that they remain safe at school, and kind of coming up with a plan if a student feels overwhelmed or high levels of stress or any kind of emotional dysregulation, having a place to go, having a person that's there to support them, all of those good things, and then that list of related services. And so the related services are things that you typically qualify for. And so, based on that evaluation process, you can always add them or remove them throughout your student's educational experience. So we'll switch over to 504 plans. They work very similarly. They're legal binding documents that require schools to provide accommodations with students with disabilities, physical or mental, that limit one or more major life activities, ensuring equal access to learning in the general education setting, with the goal of being removing those barriers from that day-to-day learning environment. So more so, and the IEPs where the focus is the goals and the specific educational instruction that students are getting in that IEP. 504 is more based off of the modifications and accommodations that they're getting in the classroom setting. So that's things like extra time, read aloud, testing, teacher notes, those kinds of things. And then still can include those related services. So more often than not, it's that social work, whether that's like a weekly check-in or if they have to create a behavior plan, something that's a little bit more structured and frequent than just like a regular check-in that you might have with a social worker from like time to time. Eligibility is similar. So requests go in writing. Usually it's a building administrator that oversees it. They have 10 days to respond to that request and let you know what those next steps are. They look at all of the same things: attendance, behavior, grades, state testing. Again, not the tell all be all, but just things that they take into consideration. Um, there is a requirement of the documentation of whatever diagnosis that you're looking at. And so then the team kind of has this checklist of what is currently being impacted or what could potentially be impacted through the diagnosis that you present. Um, and again, that like, so that specialized instruction is kind of taken out, more so that accommodation focused and nothing that's really progress monitored like it is in the IEP. For ALD specific considerations, one that I think is the most important is that health and safety monitoring. So creating those health action plans for ALD symptoms and that adrenal insufficiency. So for Peyton, he does not take a medication every day. He just has emergency medication. So his 504 allows him to keep his medication at school. We provide that health action plan, and it's all kind of spelled out that if this, then this. That way, we're kind of taking out that like nurse discretion. It's telling them exactly what his medical team is providing and what is required to make sure that he's safe at school. It also covers him when he leaves the building. So if he goes on a field trip, if he's on a bus, if he goes outside, there's always some kind of plan that we talk through as a team to make sure that he has what he needs, an identified person, and just kind of a plan of action for all different environments that he's in throughout the day. Another good one is attendance. So you can have it written in there for all excused absences due to health or medical appointments to make up for coursework. So typically in the world of education, if you're out one day, then you have one day to make it up. But we know for ALD boys, you have a long day, especially if you do all of your care stuff in one day, like Peyton does. A lot of times it takes him like a day just to get back in the swing of things, and then a day to kind of figure out what he missed, and then maybe another day to make up that work. So it kind of allows for a little bit of leeway so that it's not added stress. Um, that testing and workload, so reducing extra time on tests, visual supports, change of testing environment, whether they get pulled out of the classroom, maybe they're in like an empty classroom with an adult to kind of change that environment. So just kind of reducing all of the extra things that happen in the classroom, especially if it causes any kind of like emotional dysregulation or feeling overwhelmed, all of those good things. And then that access to social worker to kind of process through life related things, ALD specific or not. It's tough to be a kid. There's a lot of things kind of going on in the way of the world. So, again, kind of removing that, like, hey, we'll get to when we get to kind of thing, and creating that structured check in, predictable, hey, every Tuesday, fifth period, we're going to spend 10 minutes together. And I think that kind of helps kids just kind of have an ease of mind that they know that that check-in is coming versus having to like figure out like who do I go to and how do I contact them and where do I go and what if they're busy and all of the things. So that's a really good thing to add. And then that environmental, so specific seating in the classroom, scheduled breaks, supports with transporting between classes, kind of reducing that sensory, and then again that bus if your student takes the bus or any kind of transportation need. It covers to make sure that your student has a plan at school and that you're a part of that plan because nobody knows your student better than you do. General 504 information. So same thing as IEPs. 504s are good for 3 years, and then they'll require that reevaluation to determine any changes. Specific to ALD, they'll kind of look through any changes in MRI, any health updates in their medication. Are they taking it every day? Do they need to take it at school? Do you need to keep it at school? What time? A lot of times your dosage is changing. So kind of checking in about that and how frequently they have to take meds and how much and all that good stuff. They are reviewed the minimal annually. And so typically we'll like collect teacher feedback. Teachers don't usually show to 504 meetings, but they can, especially if you as the caretaker request it. But kind of just checking in, how are things going? What's in their 504? What's helpful? What do we need to add? And what's not really relevant anymore so we can kind of take that out. And then again, that no goals or specific progress monitoring, but more so those accommodations and then the related services that are kind of relevant to your student needs. Things that I think are very important. So you'll hear a lot in the school world ROI. So that stands for release of information. I think as a parent, this has been like a non-negotiable for me. It's the first thing I do at the start of every year. And then I do it in January. So typically twice a year, August, and then again in January. But I sign one to give school permission to talk to Peyton's medical team. And then Peyton's medical team also has one that they sign for them to be able to talk to school. So the intent behind that, it makes my life so much easier. So instead of having to like scramble and send all the emails and sign all the paperwork and have everything changed and updated after Peyton has a 6-month checkup, the release of information allows them to talk to each other, which is really nice because I don't always know the information that they need, or it's kind of already overwhelming, just that like emotional process of going through the every 6 months. Obviously, it's important for his success, but it's just kind of one less thing that I have to worry about. And because they have that release of information, if they have any questions or concerns or need anything additional, of course, they're going to reach out to you as a caretaker. But I think it's really nice, especially because ALD is not as commonly known, for Peyton's school team to call his medical team and say, like, hey, we noticed this, or we saw this. Is there anything that we need to know or anything that we need to change? And then I always say, keep as much communication in writing as you can. Phone calls are really nice because they're quick and easy, but it's really hard to hold people accountable if you don't have it in writing. Um, Obviously, as educators, your student is like our whole purpose, but people are human, things happen, and you don't want something to negatively impact your student because it accidentally fell through the cracks. So while phone calls are totally fine, if you do take a phone call related to a 504 IEP plan or really anything in school, I always recommend following up with an email, just to make sure that what's said is being done. And if not, then you have that documentation of, hey, I have a concern. This is what we talked about. This isn't what's happening. Like, how can we be sure to make sure that everyone's needs are being met? I found I kind of went through a couple of our Facebook pages. I feel like the myth busting is like one of the most important things. It's something that's hard to understand unless you live it or you know it. So I just kind of found some general things. 504s and IEPs are the same thing. They're not the same thing. IEPs with the specialized instruction versus 504s with the accommodations in the classroom. Both are intended to ensure equal access, but the way that you get there looks a little bit different. A plan means that my student will be separated from their peers. We kind of talked through that least restricted environment. So the goal is always to keep your student exactly where they should be. If for some reason they need some additional supports, then it's something like removing them from the classroom to take that test or to change that environment and then putting them back into their classroom. So the goal is never to keep a student away from their peers, but to make sure that they're with their peers as much as possible. Plans draw too much attention to my student. 504s and IEPs are confidential information. They're only given to those who work directly with your student. I guess the only person that would be kind of out of sorts would be a substitute. So typically teachers will keep that sub binder for them to know, like, hey, this person has this plan, and if this, then this. But it's not something that's like posted in a newsletter. Educators are not allowed to talk about IEPs or 504s with other parents or other staff members. They're all confidential, and it only pertains to the people that work specifically with your student. Plans can't change after they're signed. That is false. An IEP and 504 can change at any time. Any member of the IEP team or 504 team can call a meeting to kind of talk through what's going well, what's not going well, and some changes that need to be made. but it's also important for you as a caretaker to know like nothing changes without your approval. We have conversations a lot in team meetings, and so if we want to look at a change or potentially add something, we'll talk as a school team, and then we'll as a team we'll call home and have that conversation with you, and we don't make any final decisions until we talk with you, and if you approve it then we have to send for a signature. So it's never something that you as a caretaker are left out of, by any means. Plans are forever. So we kind of talked through plans are good for 3 years, but they can be adjusted and dropped at any time. Sometimes parents will revoke services. They might feel like, hey, my student doesn't really need this anymore. I feel like a lot of times we see that with seniors. Parents will get a little bit nervous and they'll say, like, oh, well, my student wants to go to a college, so I need to drop their services because it's going to look bad. Lots of people have 504s and IEPs for lots of different reasons. In my years of education, I've never seen an IEP or 504 plan prevent anyone from any kind of plan that they wanted to do inside of school or after school. Um, and again, just kind of holding those meetings if you have any concerns for your student. And plans are too hard for me to follow. I feel like that's a popular one. There's a lot of information and it's very overwhelming, but your student will be partnered with, typically, you call it a case manager. Um, they are the ones who run the meeting, talk to the school teams, talk to the teachers, reach out to you, check in with your student, all the things. They're kind of in charge of navigating all of the moving pieces, which is kind of nice for you too, because they will be your point of contact. So obviously, if you have something like academic related, you can always reach out to the teacher. But this is someone who, if your student gets 20 minutes of social work a month and your student's coming home and reporting that they're not seeing the social worker, then the case manager would be the person that you reach out to of, hey, here's what's in the plan. This is what my student's reporting. How do we make sure that everyone's needs are being met? And that's all for me. I wanted to share my contact information. Make sure that you have a way to contact if you ever have any questions or concerns. If you're not sure what to do or what to ask or how to respond or anything, I'm always really happy to help. Um, Having that parent perspective is also really nice. It has been really hard, even though Peyton's had that 504 for many years. We fight tooth and nail every year to have something, one or another, changed or modified. And so, if there's ever anything that I can do on my end to support you, please feel free to reach out. All right, Kelly, all you.
Okay, I just wanted to unmute. Thank you so much. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, I wish that I had a Sydney when I was first going through all these things with my kids. Um, just a little bit background about me. Yes, I am a nurse, times 1,000 years, but the education system and the academic world is a completely different world. And it was a very steep learning curve. But it has helped me become such an advocate for my son. Well, both my children, but it's primarily, and I'll get a little bit more into it. My older son, where I've had the most issues with the education system in our town and our district. Um, so I just wanted to say that yes, I've got two boys, a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, which is crazy, hard to think about. My newborn screening baby is on the left here, and that's my 9-year-old. And then his name is Kyler. And then Jalen is my 13-year-old. So both my children have had stem cell transplants, which with my older son, his was during kindergarten, the second half of kindergarten. And I'll get into a little bit more about that in a second. And then Kyler also had his during COVID. He was 3 years old. Um, but he actually, believe it or not, is having a beautiful academic experience, which again I'll tell about his story a little bit. But both my children go to school, and it's just like I said, it was a very steep learning curve, and I wish that I had Sydney and like this kind of a slideshow to reference, because a lot of my learning was just on the spot or because of my researching things for my kids. So way back when, my 13-year-old Jalen, when he was in kindergarten, since Sydney sort of just went over what 504s and IEPs are, I was refused a medical 504. Jalen was 4 when I had Kyler. So by the time he got to kindergarten, we already knew that he had adrenal insufficiency. And so I had just learned what a 504 was myself. And I had wanted him to have one because in kindergarten here in our town at the time, it was a half day program. And so I was concerned that, Jalen could potentially be trying to go to the nurse's office to get his midday hydrocortisone and maybe miss like basically all of school because half a day goes by quickly. Because what if there's 5 other kids that are in the nurse's office and need her attention, he or she, their attention at that time? I mean, Jalen could miss like a whole, and I'm making this up as I go as far as subjects go, but like he could miss a whole thing about math, and then where would we be? So I wanted him to have, this 504 in place so that we could go over, and have a legal document about what his needs were, some accommodations we needed to do. Because at this point, he hadn't had, at the start of kindergarten, he hadn't had his transplant yet. But I was refused all that. It was just, no, kindergarten's super easy for whatever that's worth. And then he can have a individualized health care plan, which is the nurse was going to just type something up and give it to teachers, but they weren't willing to give me a 504. So, some things that went into my also then wanting an IEP is that as I continued to learn and speak with people, when Jalen had his transplant, he missed the whole second half of kindergarten. And I didn't know certain things at the time, which were so, this is something that I'm not sure was mentioned before, but early intervention is another program, but that only goes to age 3. And after that, though, like your district, they're responsible for a lot of what, your needs are with your children after the age of 3. And I didn't realize that at the time. And so here Jalen is, what was he in kindergarten? Started kindergarten, he was 5, then turning 6. I was like not aware of all the things that the district probably really owed him. So one of which was that he should be getting home instruction. So we tried to coordinate home instruction during his transplant, which was up in Boston, which didn't end up panning out. But when we got home from transplant, Jalen was entitled to this home instruction. And also at this point, they still actually were saying he shouldn't have an IEP. They were like, nope, it's still, we can get this, we can do all this with just, talking it out. But as far as the home instruction went, in our district, and by the way, my stories are hopefully like a cautionary tale so that people can learn from them, because we've had a very bumpy road. Like anyone who actually knows my family and myself and like follow me on Facebook know that the school thing has been ongoing for quite some time. But I was being told things like, oh, we're just going to do you a favor, or your son and his thing. I had a nurse say that to me at one point. But the bottom line is that even in kindergarten, Jalen had rights and certain things that he was entitled to. And as I say, I learned so much as I went along. So that's just like a little bit of where it got going for us as far as 504s and IEPs and things like that. And, ultimately, by the first grade, and again, my older son had kind of a bumpy road as far like his transplant was a success. It's just that then he had a non-traumatic spinal cord injury 6 months post-transplant, which then affected his ambulation. And then also he needed a skilled nurse at school because, and this is very personal, but because of his spinal cord injury, he needed to be straight catheterized to go to the bathroom, which was then requiring, as I say, this was a skilled nursing intervention. And so now he was going to need a nurse at school beyond just the school nurse in the building. So, what we found is that in our case, a lot of issues arose surrounding, like, what do we do with somebody who has a physical disability? Because my son now used a walker to get around. And then also, he's got this skilled nursing need. That sounds scary. We don't know what to do there, which, by the way, it's not. It's not scary at all. Lots of children require paraprofessionals or nurses in the school setting. That shouldn't be scary at all. That's definitely something that a district can provide and should and have to by law if it's in the IEP and all the things that Sydney went over. Um, but then also post transplant, my son had now visual processing challenges, which basically equated to like being essentially like a learning disability. But he's cognitively intact. So it was like, what do we do with this kid? This sounds like too much and too crazy. So okay, the mom, pushed for, an IEP finally. She finally found someone who told her what that was about. Because again, Sydney just went over all this stuff. So yes, I had to put a letter in writing and request it and things like that. But now my son is in the special ed world where it still was being very challenging. And so, things that became very important for us, and this is again going back to some of the things that Sydney put in her slideshow and highlighted, but like things that stand out is the least restrictive environment. I mean, that is so important. The buzzword these days for, gen ed or mainstream children or things like that is the neurotypical children. I mean, that's a big, as I say, buzzword these days. So what I was finding though is that with my son, he wasn't being mainstreamed as much as possible. They actually were placing him in a very restrictive environment by being just in this special ed classroom and things like that. As far as an IEP went, there was now, here in our district, they call it there's a study team is what they call it. And there's usually a social worker, who's they would have several titles, but like they're the case manager or they're the head or the leader of the study team. And, even in trying to work closely with this person, we still were having a lot of trouble having my son's IEP be followed, or, like what should go into it. It just was very challenging. So, things that I will say from my experience is that, you know, everything, and I keep going back to Sydney's slideshow because it was so amazing. Like, I really just wish that I had had that when I was getting going, because I just had to upon information or hope that I ran into the right person and met the right person that would help me out or like teach me or guide me. But least restrictive environment is very important. Also, an IEP has to have measurable goals. So we found also, like, I'd be in these IEP meetings that would go on for hours, and they just would be saying the same thing over and over again, and year after year after year, but nobody was letting me know, like, had my son met these goals, and like what was going on with that, because it's not an efficient or an effective IEP if the goals aren't being met or you're not seeing progress in some way. That's very important. Um, as I say, sort of going back very briefly to the home instruction thing, in our district, and again, I'm not sure if this is different state to state. We're in New Jersey, but a child is entitled to home instruction if they're not attending school for whatever reason. And, it based on your age and whatnot, it can equate to different amounts of hours. And so, in our, like where we live, and again, I'm not sure how different this is state to state, but if you're a classified student, so for instance, my son Jalen is in special ed. He was supposed to be getting 10 hours a week of home instruction. And my son, maybe at the time, was getting like an hour, maybe twice a week. And so that's another thing that you just always want to be mindful of is what your child is entitled to, what they're supposed to be getting, because again, it wasn't even just academics, that's also the related services, like those also should be taken into consideration. So PT, OT, speech, um, your child is entitled to all of that if they're not attending school for whatever reason. um, some other things that I just wanted to highlight, because as I say, it's just been such a bumpy road with my older son, but we've learned so much as we've gone along. And now he's in seventh grade, by the way, and I have been at this since kindergarten. So, you know, I've learned a lot about advocacy, um, you know, different tactics like districts use in these meetings. So I don't want to do like a broad, you know, sort of sweep of the brush, but because I hope that there, really are districts out there who want to do the right thing and, provide these services for children. But we just happen to live in a district where every single thing, like we have to fight for it. And so, I've also learned sometimes the different tactics that they use in these meetings. Um, so, for instance, sometimes it's like telling me my son's so wonderful and all these things, or, sometimes we just waste a lot of time in these meetings instead of getting right down to like the nitty gritty and getting down to like, this is what the needs are, this is what services we need, and like, how do we make it happen? Um, because sometimes I feel like they don't know or don't necessarily want to provide these services, or hope that, as a parent that you won't be as informed maybe as much as you could be. And so therefore it's a way to sort of get out of providing certain things. But again, that's our district. So I don't want to say that's every district, but um, there are just certain things. I mean, like here's another classic example is transportation. So, you know, in our district, if a parent provides transportation, I mean, granted, there's like certain things you have to provide to the district, like proof of your insurance and things like that. But, we're entitled to a stipend for providing transportation. And no one told us that for like years. And so it was just like, I just happened to be speaking to another parent at one point who was like, yeah, didn't you know? And it was like, oh my gosh, like, was anyone going to tell us this information? Because that adds up to like a lot. And that's just, as I say, one quickie example. But as I say, I like to think that most districts out there are listening to what the needs are and providing what children need. Um, I just want to briefly though go over to my younger son, Kyler, on the left there. So his transplant was during COVID and it was incredibly complicated. And so he went in to transplant ahead around time for all milestones and then came out significantly impaired in a lot of ways. So he now was going to need a special needs school. And I would have to say that we're very lucky in our area that we have lots of wonderful special needs schools. And he ended up having this wonderful case manager. So, same thing as I had learned from Jalen. So I knew to write a letter. I knew to like get Kyler classified because by the time of his transplant, he was already 3 and older. So he was beyond early intervention. So now I did have to reach out to the district. Because even being medically complex, he shouldn't be just sitting around at home. Like he was entitled to be going to school as well. Um, and as I say, we just ended up having a wonderful case manager, a wonderful team in place. And he is going to like the most amazing school that's only like a minute from our house. And it's just like so interesting to me sometimes because then I look at my older son, who theoretically should be easier to have placed. He's cognitively intact, he's verbal, he's all these things. He has a physical disability and a learning disability, but okay, that's not something that can't be addressed. And yet it's been so hard to find him the right placement. And yet my younger son, they just were like 1, 2, 3 able to figure it out. But the takeaway from that though is that even if you have a child who's significantly impaired, they're entitled to school as well, and that's something to look into. And definitely they need an IEP as well. Some other things I just want to highlight is that when and this is again just from my experience, but it's just something to keep in mind, is that these reevaluations that can, come up every 3 years, um, you don't have to do them if you don't feel like it's appropriate or necessary. So in my case, I didn't know that though. And so the first time it had come around for Jalen, as I say, my older son, um, these reevaluations had to do with, like, there was like a psych eval, an academic eval, and a speech eval that they wanted to repeat. And, with the psych one, which is, it's this thing called the WIS-5, which, they use, actually, neuropsych people use it all the time in ALD. Like, it's standard of care. Neuropsych is standard of care in ALD. So this wasn't something that Jalen, hadn't been exposed to already. Um, but, like, for instance, in our case, they wanted to do it starting in our house, in our living room, right? Which was so distracting. And so, like, my son did not do well with that at all. And then it was like, well, let's just stop in the middle of it and then go to the public library. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a choice the whole time. I mean, there's just so many things that you learn as you go. But in the end, what I learned also is that I didn't necessarily have to have put Jalen through that. If he was clearly not going to be changed, like, programming wasn't going to be changed, his classification wasn't going to have been changed, then we really didn't have to have put him through that. So I think just always try to ask questions like, is this necessary? Can I say yay or nay? Like, just know your options and your choices. Don't feel like you have to do something just because it's being told to you. It's always okay. I mean, same with medicine, right? It's always okay to ask questions of the team. And so I want to really impress upon people that that's a thing. Like, just always ask questions. Don't feel like you just have to do something because it's being sort of handed over to you. You always have that right. And then the other thing that I just wanted to bring up is that, um, you know, we have had an extremely bumpy road. And so we have at points had to have a special ed attorney involved and also an advocate. And so those are expensive. I'm not going to lie to you. They are expensive to hire these people. But sometimes it's very necessary. And sometimes you actually do need that. Um, you need, like, that extra layer, and you need to have somebody who, like, knows exactly the law and what your rights are and what you're entitled to. So, um, while it is extremely important to go into these meetings as informed as possible, and like I said, ask questions as much as possible, sometimes it is necessary, though, to get more help, and that's okay. So I just wanted to, just make everyone aware that those are other resources out there that are available to you for the 504. And I found it more for the IEP process, to be honest with you, because there were certain things at points that we did not agree with in an IEP, and then we had to do something like due process. And there's certain timelines and windows that you have to be able to do certain things, to either disagree with it, an IEP, or, just to get it moving forward in the way that you want. And as I say, advocates and attorneys, sometimes you need somebody. Um, and then, the only other thing that I would like to also say is that, it's okay also to pull in, doctors sometimes to speak at an IEP meeting, or a therapist, or, if any of those things are involved in your child's life. I mean, for instance, the developmental optometrist who does vision therapy with, both my children, but Jalen specifically, she was happy to participate in an IEP meeting. You know, it's okay to also, bring together the medical and the educational, um, because sometimes, um, the school the school peeps, don't always know and understand the medical, especially in the ALD world. Sometimes I find people Google it, but that doesn't really capture what's going on with my children, especially post transplant. And so sometimes you need the medical to come in and participate and to help, provide as much information about your child, but then also like resources that could be helpful. So that's just another thing I wanted to add. But but yeah, it's as I say, it's been a long, steep learning curve for me, but I'm also available if anybody ever needs help or wants to know more about like anything that we've been through. Like I said, I mean, we've kind of done it all as far as like medication administration, as I say, a skilled nursing need, or, you know, an appropriate placement for your child, or just anything. If there's any questions about any of that, I'm also always available as a resource. So I don't know if there's going to be questions, I'm sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. We all learned so much, and we really appreciate that. Due to time, we aren't going to answer any questions, but we are super grateful for both of you. And for those of you who took down Sydney's information, feel free to reach out to Sydney or Kelly. Um, both of you are on social media, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So that's always a good way to reach out. Or Sydney put down her email. Um, Other than that, we will let you go, and we thank you all so much for spending your evening with us learning about IEPs, 504s, and how that interconnects with ALD. Thank you.